Let's pray.
Okay.
Lord, we give you thanks for this time. Grant to us insight into what you would have us to learn and to know of your people. Be with us today. Guide our thoughts and hearts to your will and your work and your way. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, welcome. I'm almost alive. At least my mind is beginning to work in some form or fashion today. I drove up to Washington the meeting was to start on Monday, and I drove up on Sunday, checked into the hotel, which is huge. It's where Reagan was shot, which doesn't make you feel very happy as you drive in. And realized that everyone else came with either an entire group or their spouse. I was the only one there who was by herself. But my friend, Susan Michael, who is the president of the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, was the designer of this program and prepared the days. And it was comforting to be able to see Susan the first day. At least I knew one person. And she had a brilliant idea, and probably done in multiple conferences, but she grouped us in groups of 10. So 300 people were divided into groups of 10, and you kept up with each other. You became friends. You went to all the meetings together, and you looked out for each other. I don't think they needed to do that for anyone but me. The first day was, we started late, and we had an opening session to give us an idea of what was to take place. And it began with a dinner at the Museum of the Bible at 5 o'clock. And we had multiple speakers. And, you know, when everyone's talking and you're eating dinner and the staff is moving here and there with all the plates, you have a tendency not to pay close attention and not to write extremely well thought out notes. Well, at least I had the idea of taking my little booklet with a pen, and I began to scribble down as much as I could capture. Unfortunately, most of the speakers that first evening were from Congress, and they speak fast. They think that you already know exactly what they're saying, or if they don't care. So I listened as well as I could so I could bring everything home, not only for you, but for me. The first one was one of the most amazing speakers I've ever heard, but talked like a gun. I mean, just one bullet after another after another. And you could more or less follow him. He's a lot like Advance, but nothing really stood out. When they talk, not only in riddles, but they talk fast and they don't connect their speech. They don't start with a topic. They don't have the middle important part and then conclude. They don't talk like that. But the second one did, and he was astounding. He was the Speaker of the House, Johnson, and he started with a prayer, why we were there, and who he is, and what his faith is. I've never heard a politician talk like that before, not in years. And then he gave a description of the last time he was in Israel. He had taken a group of representatives from the House to Israel, and they visited, of course, October the 7th, to see exactly what it looked like, how close, and all the damage that was done, and spoke with as many people as they could. And at the end of the tour, they were closing down for the night. And Johnson said, there was one place that I wanted to see, and you did not take us there. And it was where David fought Goliath and won. And the tour guide said, well, I'm sorry, but it's too late. I can't do that, but I'll tell you where it is. And I'll give you flashlights for each and every one of you and give you the exact directions. Well, he said, we made it. It was dark. But here we were in the valley where David beat Goliath. And all I wanted were smooth stones. I wanted 5 smooth stones, just as David had used. I'd never been there, so I didn't realize that the whole valley is full of smooth stones. And he said he and the others bent down and picked up stones, put them in every pocket they had. He said he was so weighted down that he wasn't sure that they would allow him on the plane to return. He said once he returned to the house, he walked around to all of the men and women, and he gave each one a smooth stone. And he said, I want you to use this stone to kill our enemy. We are going to battle, and we are going to win. And you heard him say that, and it almost brought tears. This is the first time that we have heard since Reagan someone who had a faith, who has a faith, and who is willing to battle against the Democrats and those who do not believe the way we believe and fight for the Constitution the way Republicans have in the past. I can't say they do it perfectly and that they do it all the time, but under his leadership, they have won battles that no one ever dreamed of. So that was the beginning of the week. And unfortunately, he's the only speaker that I remember that night and wrote anything about. Although I have to admit, let's see, Susan did say something that was quite unique. She said, for the first time in 2,000 years, Christians and Jews have met together. Now, it has been 2,000 years since Christ was here, 2,031 years, they say. And we met in Washington to combat anti-Semitism. And I didn't realize this. There were 300 people there. There were rabbis, clergy from every denomination imaginable, and Christian ministers, leaders. I guess I kind of fell into that category. And for the very first time ever, this many met together to combat what has been called the pre-Holocaust, because we are right now in this country and in Europe and in Australia, other places, we are in pre-Holocaust times and levels. We are seeing anti-Semitism in areas and in levels that I only have seen in movies that my husband always watched about World War II. And the rabbi who spoke said something that I don't think will ever leave me. He said in 1941, 40 rabbis came to the United States to tell the president what was transpiring in Europe and would he please help. They came all the way over to tell him the situation that was happening in Germany. President Roosevelt refused to meet with them. Now, if he had done that, and if he had allowed the ship holding multitudes of Jewish people to land, we would not have a history of the elimination of so many Jews, nor would we probably have the history of World War II. And Roosevelt refused to speak with them. This time, 100 rabbis came from Israel and other places to speak to Congress and also to speak at the White House. And President Trump, God bless him, met with them. And they said that in their history, this is the first time they have ever felt as though anyone outside of their own community was willing to help them with the rise of anti-Semitism. Their children are being beaten in universities. They're being killed in Germany and in France and in Australia. But it was it was an eye-opening experience for me. But anyway, we left there the following morning. We were to meet with House representatives. And you start at the lower end of Congress and you walk forever and a day all the way around. We met with 8 of them, our little group. So you can imagine all the other groups meeting with all the others. And only one met with us. The others had meetings, disappeared, and their helpers, young women, would sit there and take notes of what the man had to say, the leaders of our groups. But there was one congresswoman, and it was Jan from Virginia Beach and the Eastern Shore. And she's the only one who has ever visited the Eastern Shore. They usually just spend their time in Virginia Beach. She's very much a participant in this and was incredibly polite and delightful. Her helper, I wouldn't say assistant, maybe more like a young secretary, took notes. But it was encouraging that she at least spoke to us, and we could give her our cards and tell her that, we were behind her 100%. The ones that we met with, whose secretaries, assistants were there, would politely listen, but nevertheless would not say much. But there was one out of all who was antagonistic and gave the classic speech that liberals do when it comes to Israel. Was very, very disappointing, but that's the way Congress is. That day was incredibly difficult because it meant that you had to find your way around inside Congress and the House itself. I don't know if you've ever been up there. I have in years past, but it never looked exactly the way it looks now. It's been repainted. Within Congress itself, not where they speak, but their offices and generally speaking, the entire layout. It's all painted in one color, kind of a pale, not yellow, but cream. No details shown, no benches. It goes in a circle. It's all the same color. It's the most depressing place I have ever been. And no paintings, no pictures. Occasionally you'll see a door of a congressman that has, a little wreath on it. Very seldom you'll see any words or display. You see their name, and that's about it. And after being in there for an entire day, the only thing you can think of is, Lord, please let me see some color. Hey, nothing. Not even the people And most of the people who work there are, I would say, between the age of 22 to 30. And of course, the congressmen are all a little bit older. And they walk like they're running. And one of the people in our 10 group said, that's what you call a power walk. And you don't dare get in their way. And you can hear them stomping down the aisles. And you go in a circle and you try to find your way back, and it all looks exactly the same. So it's easy to be completely lost and disoriented. They have multiple rooms for snacks. They will give you a milkshake and a hamburger for $1.50. They are supporting their food. That certainly wouldn't pay for a hamburger and a milkshake anywhere else. So not only are we giving them their allowance, but we're also feeding them. And there are multitudes of them everywhere. Each congressman has at least 5 to 7 to 10 helpers. And each place that we visited have little snacks that are sent up from their particular place. So that means that they're bribed with all of their food from home. It was very discouraging to see what really goes on in Congress and how important it is for us to pray for our congressmen. Not only Jan, but every single one of them, because they are involved in this community constantly, and they see nothing else but this community. And I remember years past that we were in, Susan and I were in a prayer group with a mother, a wife, who came to Washington with her husband as the representative from Florida. And all of the know-it-alls in Congress, the wives, gave a luncheon for these newcomers. And the first thing they said was, within a year's time, half of you will either be gone, you'll be an alcoholic, or you will be divorced. Now, can you imagine leaving your family, coming to Washington with the hope that you will be able to do something? And her husband was a pediatrician and who was there to fight for the life of children. And you hear this, and within a year's time, we had a prayer group, and she was part of that prayer group. And for 6 months, we prayed for this woman. And there were only 5 of us. And we listened to her stories. We shared the pain. We saw the tears. And of course, she was gone. And within 2 years, her husband left. And his point was, I can't seem to reach anyone. So it is vitally important that we pray for these people and their families. So much for my soapbox. And the second day, on Tuesday, we met all together and heard probably 15 congressmen. And when you hear them all together, basically all saying the exact same thing, they just wanted their name to be shown and for their constituency to know that they're up there and they're doing their work. I have to admit that most of them were young. I doubt that any of them were over 45 years old. So how much experience does a 35-year-old have in that setting up there? But they were all Christians. They all spoke with an excellent idea. But there was one who stood out. And we all stood up and praised him during his speech and, of course, afterwards. And he was the new ambassador from Israel to the United States. He was the most incredible speaker. And at the end, several of them said, who brought him, said that he is the next prime minister of Israel once Netanyahu retires. God willing, he'll only retire and will stay as long as possible. He was an excellent speaker. He was in college here in the United States. He knew most of the people, most of the elderly ones from in Congress. He speaks without an accent. He was in college here in the United States, in graduate school here in the United States, and then went home and worked for Netanyahu in several different areas. And he recently lost his oldest son to the war. We need to pray for him. And I'm sorry, I did not write down his name, but we can look it up. He is the Israeli ambassador to the United States and just started. He's brand new. It was incredibly, my mind is still working with what I learned. I mean, it will take me the next 3 meetings to go through all of this with you and teach you what I learned and what I heard and what I missed because I couldn't keep up with it all. And which is excellent because Susan wrote a little booklet that most of the people there said it was probably the best synopsis of what is transpiring in the world today that we don't hear of here in the United States. And you hear a little bit of it. It depends on what you read and what you see on television. But I think by and large, we are in the dark. Our final day was Wednesday. We met for an early breakfast, and there were numerous speakers. They tried not to speak very long because we only had, let's see, 4 hours. But there was one rabbi who said, we have always lived with one suitcase packed, as we never know when we have to escape. And I thought, how in the world can you live like that? Um, he um, he said that's their life, and I knew the history of Israel. I knew the history and know the history of the Jews. I've been over there numerous times. I've spoken with them. I've had meals with them. But they were primarily Messianic Jews, those who have accepted Jesus as their Messiah. These were men who were rabbis. They are not Messianic rabbis. There were one or two of them there. But they said for the first time, they were in a group that they felt as though they were not hated. And they were in a group who could stand with them when things became difficult. They were oftentimes close to tears as they spoke, because they did not expect to have the reception that they received. They were fearful of coming. They were fearful of the meetings. And they said they had to gather their strength and pray to God that He would allow them to return home in safety. Now, can you imagine living like that? But anyway, the final speaker, there were several, but there was one that, now what did I do with my notes? Oh, here they are. Notes. The last speaker for the last day was Oz Guinness. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he is, excuse me, I need to, my fingers become a little chilled, and they become just will not move, closed. Oz Guinness. Now, if you can, he's online. His biography, excerpts from his work. If you can ever find any of his books, read everything you can get your hands on. We've read him through the years, but I had since spent so much time with the hours and the history that I had forgotten a lot. And he was a friend of C.S. Lewis. And he lives in Fairfax, Virginia. And I knew that he was up there. And I cannot believe that I had been up there so many times and did not go to any of his speaking engagements. But he began with his ancestry. And the more he talked, the more I almost became shocked and in tears. Not only was he a friend of C.S. Lewis, but he's read everything Lewis ever wrote. I don't know about you, but we rather read as much as we could about Lewis before we left for seminary. one of his ancestors worked with Wilberforce, who is the most amazing man in England who fought against slavery and the slave ships. Another ancestor knew and worked with Colonel Dreyfus. Dreyfus was put on trial in France and condemned to death. He was not guilty, but he was condemned because he was Jewish. And he had to have done something wrong because he was Jewish. Another ancestor of the Guinness, in 1917, bought land in Israel to give to the Jews, to a family, to begin a new life. Another ancestor worked with Balfour on the Balfour Declaration, which prepared to give the land of Israel to the Jews. Another ancestor fought with Colonel Allenby, who fought in Israel against the Muslims and walked into Jerusalem. Let's see, not all of I can't read, unfortunately, all of my notes. He was born in 1941, which makes us almost a contemporary. And when he started talking about his own life, I realized that we and my husband and I walked the same path as Os Guinness. And it began to reverberate within my mind and memory of what we had done. Oz knew Francis Schaeffer. We knew Francis Schaeffer, read every book we could get our hands on. And he also lived in L'Abri for 3 years, studying under Schaeffer. When we moved to Hollybrook here on the shore, I wanted to start a L'Abri, very much like Francis Schaeffer's wife did in Switzerland. He knew the Wesley brothers from the Methodist Church. And his ancestors worked with the Wesleys. And they were very much supporters of the Jews and the Zionist movement to allow the Jews to go home, to fulfill the prophecy that God said, I will bring you home. This is your land, just as he did at the time when Moses saw the promised land and Jacob brought them in. Well, my family was the Methodist movement, and the Wesleyan brothers came through, taught them, and the church was built at that time. And I always wondered why I felt so close and understood the Jewish movement, because the ancestor of mine were the Wesleyan brothers who felt that. Wilberforce read him and his life from cover to cover. Obviously, C.S. Lewis read everything I could get. We both read everything we could get our hands on. But C.S. Lewis was always difficult for me. Some parts were incredibly simple. Other parts were kind of revolving, and my husband understood him. I didn't always understand C.S. Lewis, but he would explain it to me. One of his ancestors bought the land in Israel and gave it to the Jews. And those were the ones who came from the Holocaust and were given that land. I had that feeling, that same feeling while we were over there, that so many of them would come up to me and say, "When are you making your Aliyah? You must be Jewish." We have absolutely no Jewish blood that I know of in our family, but we all look like that, and we look like the English. You see family portraits and ancient portraits in England, and we're almost a stamp out of the English. So there must be a connection there. Of course, the Jews lived in England for centuries until they were thrown out, just as they were thrown out of Spain and thrown out of so many other countries. Of course, the Balfour Declaration. If you can look it up online, and it was something that we have studied and were very pleased with, but unfortunately, the English did not follow through with it as they should have. Os Guinness was born in China. His mother was a surgeon. They lived through the Chinese War during World War II. And we have always felt, my husband and I, that we made the mistake. We lost, as the United States, we lost China to the enemy because we did not back and of course, my poor little brain cannot remember, but there was a leader at that time who wanted to fight against the enemy, the Marxist communist, and we refused to help him. And Os Guinness said that 15 million, no, more than that, there were 15 million that died in Europe during World War II. I think I'll have to look it up again, but it was something like 50 million Chinese were killed from starvation or the war. And he said when he was born, soon afterwards, his mother had twin boys, and they died during that time. And the people were so hungry that they would sell their babies as meat to other people. He had to live in this. And what drew me to that was my favorite historian was Hudson Taylor, who began the Inland China Mission. He was from England, and I read his autobiography, years ago, and what he had to say, to live with an understanding that God will take care of you no matter where you are, but if you follow what he has asked you to do. And that helped me when we were in seminary. We knew we were supposed to be there. We knew that my husband had been called. I felt that I had too, but what was I to do except to listen to lectures that I didn't always agree with? And listening to Guinness that last day, detailing his family ancestry, and then realizing that our family ancestry, not identical, but similar, but our readings and our life's work are almost identical. The people that had the greatest influence on him had a tremendous influence on us. His ancestry, my husband's ancestry, were men who, after the battle of the northern states against the southern states, had to find a life. And one of them went out west and was there when the golden spike was hammered in for the first chain. He came home and started a bank and had banks scattered throughout North Carolina. His grandfather became a priest and started 35 churches in South Carolina and North Carolina. Well, here's my husband who is doing the exact same thing. First a banker and then a priest. So listening to Guinness detail his ancestry and what he has read and who has influenced his life made me realize that God has detailed everything for you and for me to be who we are today. What you've read, who your ancestors are, what he has prepared for you to do in these last days. And as I began to collect all of these thoughts and listen to all of these speakers, I was shocked to realize the influence that God has on our lives, where we came from, who our ancestors are, what we have done, what we believe, what we have read, makes us who we are in Him and prepares us for what He calls us to do. If you have an opportunity, read some of these people, read some of their work. And the last thing that caught me was we lived in South Carolina, of course. The children went to Heathwood Hall Episcopal School before the Episcopal Church went into a garbage can. Our priest was the chaplain who spoke about Jesus once a week at the school and prayed for them every morning before they began their day. But the unique thing that struck me and reminded me, I think God just said, you've forgotten a part. The school was open to everyone. We had children in wheelchairs. We had children Black. We had children who were Jews. We had children who were non-Episcopalians. So the children had the opportunity to see life as it really is and who your neighbor is. And for that reason, there has never been any hatred of Blacks. I was raised by them. I don't know about you, but I can remember sitting on the side of the street with all the other little Black children all around me, being taken down there to watch the parades at Christmas and New Year's and Easter. Any parade that came through Atlanta, I was there on the curb with everybody else, and I was the only one that rather stood out. But they were my friends. Of course, the nurse took me, and I wouldn't give anything for those times. But anyway, there were Jewish children with ours, and they wanted the children to understand who they were. So they invited the children and us, all the parents, one that, well, really mothers, fathers couldn't go, to the synagogue in Columbia, South Carolina. And the rabbi explained every single thing within the synagogue. The candles, the menorah, the way it was built, and it was built in the fashion of the temple in Jerusalem. It was a fascinating time and an interesting time. And it gave the girls the opportunity to know who others are and what they do. Now, we only have 15 minutes. I know I've spoken about my heart in all of this, and I'll teach what was taught about it next Thursday. But I was quite struck with what God had in mind and what it all meant. And I hope that it will be of some help, and we'll go through it next week on what was truly taught. There's one line that I think we all know. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I'm not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Martin Niemöller, German Lutheran pastor and theologian, following the Holocaust. Now, we'll go through a little bit of it next week. I don't think you need to go through all of it. But it was a fascinating time, and I learned a lot, and I am thankful for what God revealed during that time. Do y'all have any questions or opinions?
I looked up, let me see. Now, our friend the internet says that the incumbent ambassador from Israel is named Yehiel Leiter. Is that who you heard?
Well, all I know is I don't have his name, and it's not listed on any of the papers.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
He
Yeah.
is the new ambassador from Israel to the United States.
Yes, this says since January 27th this year. So he
That
must be,
him.
that's who it must be, yeah. Yeah,
He was impressive.
sounds like it. Yeah.
He went to one of the Ivy League schools and
Mm.
has a doctorate degree. Does it say?
It just says he grew up in the US, I think, or was born in the US, I think. No, it doesn't say. It has some pictures, but
Well, he was impressive.
yeah, sounds like it. The conference sounds amazing. I had no idea that that was the purpose of the conference. It was,
Neither.
oh, really?
I knew that it was that there would be 300 people, and there'd be a scattering because it's sponsored by the Christian Embassy of Jerusalem. And I knew that there would be some, but I thought probably she'd send over, have some Messianic Jews come over, because that's who she introduced me to years ago. But Susan's been working on this since I first met her in 1993, as I started preparing for Tapestry in 93. And women began to hear what I had in mind. And there was a group of them, 15, that had been praying for 15 years that someone would open the National Cathedral for women of all denominations to pray for the United States. And here God sends me. And in the midst of all of that, I met or was introduced to every influential woman in Washington and abroad and here in the United States without ever realizing it. I felt at times that I was behind a wagon full of 15 horses and I couldn't keep them in order. It was an interesting time, to say the least, an incredibly busy time. I learned a lot, but by the time our daughters began to have the 10 grandchildren, I was ready to retire. I was exhausted. We had been through seminary, and then I had been through the preparation for Tapestry, and then the traveling with Tapestry and traveling abroad. And I retired and never looked back until I began to write what I had learned. And this time brought it all back to mind. Susan never retired. She never had any children, so this was her child. And she was excellent. And she was one of the best speakers there. I brought 2 of these little books, and I thought that I would not only read from it, but also send a copy to, I have 2 copies of that and 2 copies of another one. Now I can't find it. But there's several. Oh, here it is. Another one. Every Generation's Story, 75 Years of American Christian Engagement with Israel. And that might have some of the information of Os Guinness's family and what they did. There's another one, it's a group I'd never heard of, called Eagle's Wings. It's one of the largest Christian leaders and supporters of Israel here in the United States. And everyone there knew the Bishop Robert Stearns. But I picked this up and I thought I would, I'd like to keep it, but loan that to y'all. And you'll have 3 books that you can back and forth and read. And 2 of them, you can keep if you'd like. It was, oh well, never mind. What do you have to say, Ro?
I was really fascinated at the fact that the whole thing is wonderful. Everything you said was just wonderful. The rabbis that came over with this group, and that they were fearful. They didn't know what to expect coming over here. And that really saddened me that our country has gotten to that point where anybody should be frightened to come here, that are invited. It's just so sad. And the second thing is the Oz Guinness. How do you spell his last name?
I don't know.
If you don't know, okay, just
I looked him up
do you know?
online, and if you put
Okay,
Oz Gin, it'll pop his
okay,
name up.
okay, because I'm interested in reading some of his works, so
Oh,
I'll check that out.
he,
Yeah,
he was
it's
he was just
amazing.
wonderful.
I'm sure he's amazing, and I'm so fascinated as you with Israel. But I did go to, and I did get a Smooth River rock when I was in Israel.
Oh, you
So
did.
yes, my husband and I found the place, and we looked for a few rocks and brought them back for the church that I belonged to at the time. So yeah, it's a wonderful place. You could spend a year in there and feel like you haven't
I
even
know.
touched it. Ah, it's amazing, just amazing. But anyway, it was all very fascinating, and thank you very much. And I too did not know that you were going. I thought you were just going for the day on Thursday, but you were coming back on Thursday, and that's why you couldn't. So you had a really exhaustive week.
I had no idea. She did
Mhm.
not give me any details. She just said, you need to be there. And
Amazing.
she knew about the hours and the history that I have done. And she's familiar with all of the people who were there, apparently. They all came at her request. Um, and she knew that I would meet people who would be interested in what I have done through the years with the hours. And she didn't say a word about that. Um, so it was very shocking, but at the same time, when I was preparing to go, I said, no, I really don't need to go. So I backed off. And then within 2 days' time, I had an urgency to go. It was as though I was being pushed to go. And I've always been in favor of the Jews and never held anything against them. I knew their history, but I obviously needed to be there to meet people who were ready to hear the history
Mhm.
of the church and what we have used and taken from the Jews. And we need to give them credit for it and to learn that history. So obviously that's why I was pushed to go. But I have to admit, it's the first time I've been in a conference in years. And I don't think that I could manage another one. There's just, and everyone's so excited and they walk it, that power walk. I can't do that anymore. But I am thankful that we will have the opportunity of knowing what to read and who to read, and start thinking about your heritage. Who did God make you? He made you. You are who you are because of your ancestors. And I remember when I started reading the history of, obviously, my family when I joined the DAR years ago, and then married. And then we realized that our ancestors settled, one at the headwaters and one at the end of the Haw River. And both of them had the same amount of land. Both of them settled primarily about the same time. And both of them had a deep, abiding faith. No wonder we married. And it's amazing what God does with his people. Even when, I can't say that I felt as though I was one of his before I accepted the Savior and the Holy Spirit. But my grandmother knew. And because of that, I pray for our grandchildren daily. And now the great-grandchildren. But thank you for listening to my rambling. I know
Oh,
it's
it's
not your
wonderful.
typical teaching that you hear from me. But these parts meant a lot, and I hope that they will to you. And we need to know that English history because the country it was based on it. And one thing that I wrote down that someone said, I don't know who said it, but the Puritans were Zionists. They believed that God had was Jewish, and that we needed to support them. I'd never heard that. And one of those rabbis, we had 2 or 3 in the group that I was in. They're not Orthodox, so you couldn't tell. One of them wore the little crown, but the other 2 did not. One of them told the story that he had been in Israel, and in one of the shops on Yehuda, which is a major thoroughfare downtown. And he was buying something special for one of his sons. And a woman came in and wanted something, but she didn't have enough money for it. And he went over to her and he said, "Please allow me to pay for this." And her comment was, "Oh, no, no, no." And he went out, he took an identical item like she had, took it up and paid for it, and then gave it to her. And he said, she began to cry. She said, "We didn't think that anyone like you would ever do anything like this for us." And of course, you didn't see a dry eye in the place when he told that story. That we should have been more like that when we were over there. I mean, we bought their products and talked with them, and they kind of laughed and wanted to know when we were coming. But I always assumed that they enjoyed us as much as we enjoyed them. I never, in my wildest imagination, imagined that they feared us. And they were polite because of that fear. I'm learning a new world that I didn't know existed. Well, God be with you
And
and
with
keep
you.
you, and God grant us wisdom and knowledge and a sound mind to do his work. Goodbye.
Amen.